Come see us doing live shows. We'll be in Los Angeles, Honolulu, Baltimore, Atlantic City, Cohoes, New York, Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets, and only jimmydore.com. So Rachel Maddow's back to lying about COVID and the people who got it right. So Trump has nominated Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, guest of this show. He's a super smarty pants scientist, doctor person from Stanford. And he was one of the authors of the Great Barrington Declaration, which came out at the beginning of COVID pandemic. And they talked about how to handle it. And they said, you don't do lockdowns. You do targeted protection of the people who are the most vulnerable, like you do with the flu, like you do with the elderly, the people with comorbidities. Now she's going to lie about that. She's saying that Trump is appointing all quacks. Now, let's remember, there was no bigger liar and spreader of misinformation during COVID than Rachel Maddow. She was wrong about everything and lied about everything. She said if you got the vaccine, it would stop the virus dead. The virus can't use you to go to another person, and the virus will get us out of the pandemic. That was always, and the vaccine will get us out. That was all. Those were always lies. I knew it when she was saying it. I knew it at my show in my garage. So here we go. Here she is. She's going to try and slander and smear at the behest of the people who pay her. Big Pharma pays her salary.
On the heels of Donald Trump picking him to run Medicare and Medicaid in this country, we also got news on other healthcare picks to run the CDC. Donald Trump picked a former Republican congressman who for years has crusaded on the false claim that vaccines must be the cause of autism.
Just because Joe Scarborough of MSNBC agreed with Robert Kennedy years ago on this, so did Jon Stewart, so did Robert De Niro, so did Jim Carrey, so did Jenny McCarthy, so did a lot of people who look into it. Just crazy. So do lots of parents of autistic children. They're just assholes. They're crazy. But the person who got everything wrong about COVID, about Russiagate, about the Ukraine war, and Syria, I'm sure she's right about this. I'm sure she's right about vaccines and autism. Why would Big Pharma ever lie? Why would they need a liability shield? Why does Big Pharma need a liability shield for their vaccines if they're so fantastic? I bet they are. That's why I'm saying get rid of the liability shield. What do they need it for? Okay, here we go.
On the heels of Donald Trump picking him to run Medicare and Medicaid in this country, we also got news on other healthcare picks to run the CDC. Donald Trump picked a former Republican congressman who for years has crusaded on the false claim that vaccines must be the cause of autism. To lead the National Institute of Health, Trump's top candidate endorsed herd immunity as the best way to address the COVID pandemic. Just a fancy way of saying, let's get everybody sick and see what happens. Cull the weak, cull the elderly.
Okay, so that's a direct lie, because that's not what Dr. Jay Bhattacharya recommended in the Great Barrington Declaration. It wasn't cull the weak and cull the elderly. It was actually protect them. You want to hear it? Because here he is saying exactly what the Great Barrington Declaration called for.
Before the vaccines, there were strategies that we had not adopted that we proposed to protect the vulnerable. Better strategies to protect old nursing homes, better strategies to protect older people living alone at home, better strategies to protect older people living in multi-generational homes. Fundamentally, those kind of strategies are local public health policies, where the local public health officials deeply understand the living conditions of the people that they are supporting. And so the Great Barrington Declaration essentially was a call for participation and discussion by local public health officials to help protect the vulnerable, like organizing, for instance, food deliveries to older people living alone, rather than food deliveries to the rich laptop class, which is what we in effect did. So, I mean, it's essentially to engage. It was a call to engage in discussion and debate, and also thinking together about how best to protect the old. It's a difficult thing to do in the midst of a pandemic where you have this very sort of contagious virus. But it's possible to protect people, certain classes of people, as we saw. We protected the laptop class for a long time. So I think that really was our hope, that it would engage people with expertise in discussion. And instead, what we got was this nonsense, right? What we got was that we're fringe, that it's impossible to protect the vulnerable except with the lockdown, and hundreds of thousands of people would die. Well, we followed their policy. They got their lockdowns. They got what they wanted. They won the policy debate, and hundreds of thousands of people have died.
So that's what he actually proposed. So Rachel Maddow was just flat out lying again. And do you want to see her do it? Here, I'll show it one more time.
On
let's
the
watch
heels
her
of
flat
Donald
out
Trump
lie.
picking him to run Medicare and Medicaid in this country, we also got news on other healthcare picks to run the CDC. Donald Trump picked a former Republican congressman who for years has crusaded on the false claim that vaccines must be the cause of autism to lead the National Institute of Health. Trump's top candidate endorsed herd immunity as the best way to address the COVID pandemic. Just a fancy.
So I just showed you what he endorsed. He was against lockdowns, which now science has proven were the wrong strategy. He was right. We shouldn't have done lockdowns. We should have had targeted protection, which is what he just talked about. That protecting elderly, people in nursing homes, people with comorbidities, the weak. And she's going to lie right now and say he didn't want to do that. Watch.
Way of saying, let's get everybody sick and see what happens. Cull the weak. Cull the elderly. Now we know that the vaccines work well enough that the virus stops with every vaccinated person. A vaccinated person gets exposed to the virus. The virus does not infect them. The virus cannot then use that person to go anywhere else.
Then why
it cannot use
need
a vaccinated person as a host to go get more people. That means the vaccines will get us to the end of this.
So that was a lie when she said it. It's a lie today. Coronavirus is still with us. They're still telling you to take boosters. You'd be on your 10th shot now. You think Rachel Maddow's on her 10th shot? So I can't believe she's not speaking up for Doritos and seed oils right now, I'll be honest. So she's just blatantly lying. So I want to show you this. And she's still lying because she knows her audience is so stupid and they believe everything she said and they don't know anything about COVID or the vaccines or what the Great Barrington Declaration is because she never told them. She's only lied to them about it. So she knows she can get away with this with her audience because her audience is brain dead, brainwashed, Stepford News consumers. And so it's continuing. So the lie about COVID and the vaccines and lockdowns and the Great Barrington Declaration and doctors who got it right, the lie is still continuing. It hasn't stopped, which is kind of amazing, right? Well, here's Ed Dowd, also former guest on the show. And he's going to explain to you why this kind of corruption, why this kind of scandal doesn't stop, because he's seen it on Wall Street. Here we go.
I've been on Wall Street a long time, and I've seen corporate frauds. And in corporate fraud, when they get caught or it starts to unravel, they don't say, hey, I'm caught, sorry. They wait until they're stopped. And they continue to tell their lies in their story. They double and triple down. They convince some of the investors that are hanging on to their, hope that they're going to gain back some of their losses. They talk to them and convince them that they're not lying all the way to the end. And that's why people will hold frauds to zero, because they believe and trust these people. It's classic criminal behavior. So if I take it to this horrific situation we have now, and like you said, whether it was accidental or on purpose, it doesn't matter. At this point, the data that I'm seeing and that my team has presented, the global health authorities are seeing. Denmark's already told us that they're seeing it, but they're not admitting it. So it's basically a cover-up, criminal negligence, and crimes being committed right now, because that's what's going on. And they double and triple down until someone stops them. The problem is, in my corporate fraud experience, there were regulators that would come in, okay, and the markets would punish the stocks, and then the regulators would come in. So the problem here is we have a population that doesn't know what's going on, and there's a group of us that do know, and we need to get that information to the rest of the population. I call this the greatest asymmetric information gap of my career, meaning most of the globe doesn't know what's just happened, and we need to get them aware of this. And once we get to a tipping point, like I saw in my career in financial markets, you get enough marginal minds on board, things will change. We don't have anybody coming to rescue us. And I said on a couple shows early on when I got started that I expected them to triple and double down. And it was no shock to me that they approved the vaccine for childhood schedules because they want their immunity.
So that's why Rachel Maddow keeps going at the behest of people like Dr. Fauci, Dr. Collins, Big Pharma, and the lies. That's why she's still doing it. Just like that, just like the corporate fraud. They just keep doubling down until someone stops them. And no one's going to stop her because the people who fund her program is Big Pharma. Which is why she won't stop also lying about Ukraine, because the other people who fund her show are the military-industrial complex. So here's Dr. Jay Bhattacharya, and he's going to tell you the right stuff that they should have done during COVID in real time.
Speaking with the sitting governor of Florida, Governor Ron DeSantis, advising him about the evidence on whether masking children had any effect on the pandemic. I told him correctly, based on the literature, that there is no randomized evidence suggesting any efficacy of masking children. And YouTube took down that video. From the Missouri versus Biden case, what we've learned is that these were not accidents. What happened actually was that the government was pressuring social media companies on setting an agenda for them for who and what to censor. It didn't matter if what they were censoring was true or false. They just was inconvenient to the government preferred policies on COVID. And so I was sort of at the crosshairs of that, but it wasn't just me, Robbie. It was a tremendous number of Americans who, whether they, again, based on true or false statements, it was legally protected speech. They posted it on social media. The government pressured social media to label it as misinformation or to take it down or suppress its reach, even without the people knowing it. It was a direct violation of the American First Amendment, as the Fifth Circuit just confirmed.
And so that guy's going to be the new director of the NIH, which is fantastic, even though Rachel Maddow will lie about him through his whole tenure. And YouTube took down his video about masking children, because you know why? Because masking children is effective if you want to mentally stunt children, because that's what masks do. And just to let you know that guy Mehdi Hasan, that piece of garbage. This Bill Ackerman says Dr. Jay Bhattacharya is a brilliant scientist, but as importantly, he is unafraid to stand by his carefully researched opinions, even when there is enormous society or governmental pressure to shut his mouth. Mehdi says, absolute nonsense. It's the exact opposite. More people would have died had we listened to the Great Barrington Declaration, folks, including Bhattacharya, who we've proved wrong. No, you didn't. He's just making this up. We had the highest death rate in the world. We didn't follow what Jay Bhattacharya said to do. This woman says, check the stats from Sweden, a country that actually lived out many of the recommendations of the Great Barrington Declaration, and then get back to me. You don't know what you're talking about. He knows what he's talking about. He's lying. That's what Mehdi Hasan, that's his specialty. He lies at the behest of the establishment. He told the truth one time about Palestine, and they fired him. And so now he's scrambling desperately to get back, get some of that corporate dough. That's all this is. This is virtue signaling to somebody to hire him at a corporate outlet. Bhattacharya was not proven wrong. Mehdi Hasan, he knows he's lying. There's nothing to debate. He's just flat lying. And he's counting on the people that follow him on Twitter don't know anything about COVID, because they don't. My friends in Hollywood still don't know anything about COVID. Still refuse to know anything about COVID. The people I've debated on this show about mandating vaccines still don't know anything about COVID. Nothing. Come see us doing live shows. We'll be in Los Angeles, Honolulu, Baltimore, Atlantic City, Cohoes, New York, Providence, Rhode Island. Go to jimmydore.com for a link for tickets, and only jimmydore.com.